So I found something in Isaiah chapter 66 that completely changed the way I look at biblical history, and I wanted to share it with you guys. And if this connection means what I think it could mean, we may be reading the Bible from the wrong side of prophecy, because Isaiah wrote something roughly 700 years before Christ that seems strangely specific. Listen carefully. Isaiah chapter 66 describes judgment, but then something happens that I don't hear people talk about enough. There are survivors, and Yahuwah says, I will send those who survive to Spain, Libya, Lydia, Tubal, Greece, and to the distant islands that have not heard of me or seen my greatness, and they will proclaim my glory among the nations. That's in Isaiah 66, verse 19. Greece. Why would Isaiah specifically name Greece? Because now I want you to fast forward hundreds of years. The Messiah comes, he's crucified, the gospel begins spreading beyond Judea, Jerusalem and the temple are eventually destroyed in 70 AD. And what language becomes absolutely central to the transmission of the New Testament? Greek. Not Latin, not the Hebrew language of ancient Israel, Greek. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul's letters, Revelation, the New Testament, manuscripts that became foundational to Christianity were overwhelmingly transmitted to us in Greek. And then look at where the gospel exploded: Corinth, Philippi, Thessalonica, Ephesus. Again and again, you are looking at the Greek-speaking world. Now go back to what Isaiah said centuries earlier. They will proclaim my glory among the nations. Do you see why this stopped me? Because Isaiah didn't just describe judgment, he described survivors being sent out to the nations. And one of the places he specifically names is Greece. Then centuries later, Greek becomes one of the primary languages through which the message of the Messiah is preserved and carried across nations. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. But now here's where this gets even more controversial, because eventually scripture moves from the Greek-speaking world into the Latin world, and then eventually into English. And with every generation, ordinary Christians become further removed from the language, culture, manuscripts, and historical setting of the earliest church. And then something else happens. Books like Wisdom, Sirach, Second Esdras, and other books commonly grouped within the Apocrypha remained in Christian biblical traditions for centuries. They were even printed between the covers of the original 1611 King James Bible. But eventually, many Protestant Bibles stopped printing them. The books didn't suddenly vanish from history. The manuscripts didn't cease to exist. They disappeared from the Bibles millions of ordinary Christians were holding in their hands. And suddenly, Revelation chapter 20 hits differently for me. Because after the 1,000 years, Satan is released. And what does Scripture say his mission is? Deception. Revelation chapter 20, verses 7 through 8, when the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be set loose from his prison, and he will go out to deceive the nations. Notice something. It doesn't say his greatest weapon would be destruction. It says deception. And Yahushua himself warned, watch out and do not let anyone fool you. Matthew 24:4. So here's the question I cannot stop thinking about. What if the greatest deception isn't convincing humanity to believe something that never happened? What if it's convincing humanity to forget something that did? Forget the history, forget the context, forget the books earlier Christians read. Forget the world Christianity emerged from. And eventually, forget where we actually are in the biblical timeline. Because if Revelation 20's deception happens after the 1,000 years, then maybe the question isn't only, when will all of this happen? maybe we should also be asking, what if some of it already did? Isaiah names Greece, the gospel enters the Greek-speaking world, the New Testament is preserved primarily in Greek. Survivors proclaim his glory among the nations, and centuries later, we are holding translations while being told certain books our ancestors read aren't worth opening. I don't think we should be afraid to ask questions about that, because if Satan's final weapon is deception, then questioning what we've been taught isn't something I'm afraid of anymore. I'm afraid of never questioning at all. So tell me, why do you think Isaiah specifically named Greece? And could Isaiah chapter 66 be showing us something about the biblical timeline that we've been reading right past?